In 509 BCE, the Roman people made a decision that would echo through history. They would never again bow to a king. What emerged from the ashes of monarchy was something revolutionary. A republic where power belonged not to one man, but to the people and their representatives. This wasn't just a change of government, it was the birth of a new form of civilization. Over the next 4 centuries, this Roman Republic would transform from a small Italian city-state into the master of the Mediterranean world. Through a combination of military genius, political innovation, and sheer determination, Rome would conquer an empire that stretched from Britain to Egypt. Today we witness the greatest expansion in human history, and meet the legendary figures who made it possible, including Rome's greatest enemy, Hannibal of Carthage. This is the story of how Rome learned to rule the world. The event that sparked the Roman Revolution was both personal and political. The rape of Lucretia, a virtuous Roman matron, by Sextus Tarquinius, the king's son. When Lucretia took her own life rather than live with the shame, her relative Lucius Junius Brutus rallied the Roman people. Holding aloft her bloodied dagger, Brutus swore a sacred oath: "Never again shall any man be king in Rome." The revolution was swift and decisive. Tarquin the Proud fled the city, never to return. The Romans had tasted freedom, and they would die before giving it up. But destroying the monarchy was easier than replacing it. What Rome created next would become one of history's most influential political systems. The Roman Republic was built on a revolutionary principle: no single person should hold absolute power. Instead, they created a complex system of checks and balances that would influence governments for over 2,000 years. At the top were 2 consuls, equal partners who served for just 1 year. Each could veto the other's decisions, ensuring that no individual could become a dictator. These weren't just politicians, they were Rome's military commanders, leading the legions in person. The real power, however, lay with the Senate, a body of former magistrates who guided Roman policy through experience and wisdom. The Senate didn't just advise, it controlled finances, foreign policy, and military strategy. Below the consuls were other magistrates, praetors who administered justice, quaestors who managed finances, and aediles who maintained the city. Each office had its role, its limits, and its accountability to the people. But the most radical innovation was the concept of popular sovereignty. Ultimate authority belonged to the Roman people themselves, expressed through various assemblies where citizens could vote on laws, declarations of war, and the election of magistrates. This wasn't democracy as the Greeks knew it. It was something uniquely Roman, a republic where merit, service, and the common good were supposed to triumph over personal ambition. But the early republic was far from perfect. Roman society was divided into 2 classes that seemed destined for eternal conflict. The Patricians were the aristocratic families who claimed descent from the original senators appointed by Romulus. They monopolized political power, religious authority, and legal privilege. To them, the republic was their inheritance. The Plebeians were everyone else: farmers, craftsmen, traders, and laborers who made up the vast majority of Rome's population. They could vote, but they couldn't hold high office, marry patricians, or even know what laws governed them. This inequality led to one of history's first great civil rights movements. When the plebeians felt oppressed, they didn't riot. They did something far more effective. They went on strike. The first secession of the plebs occurred in 494 BCE. The common people simply left Rome, withdrawing to a hill outside the city. No one worked the fields, crafted the goods, or served in the army. Rome ground to a halt. The patricians quickly realized they needed their fellow citizens. Through negotiation, they agreed to create a new office, the tribune of the plebs, representatives who could protect common citizens from aristocratic abuse and even veto the actions of consuls. This wasn't just a political compromise, it was a recognition that in Rome, the people truly were sovereign. The plebeians' greatest victory came in 450 BCE with the creation of the 12 Tables, Rome's first written law code. Before this, laws were kept secret, known only to the patrician priests who could interpret them however they wished. Justice depended on who you knew, not what you'd done. The 12 Tables changed everything. For the first time, every Roman citizen could know their rights and obligations. The law was the same for everyone, at least in theory. These bronze tablets, displayed in the Forum for all to see, became the foundation of Roman law. Their principles, presumption of innocence, the right to defense, proportional punishment, would influence legal systems around the world for millennia. More than legal reform, the 12 Tables represented a philosophical revolution, the idea that government exists to serve justice, not the convenience of rulers. With their internal conflicts resolved, the Romans turned their attention outward. Italy in the 5th century BCE was a patchwork of rival peoples, each with their own ambitions. Rome's first great challenge came from the Etruscan city of Veii, just 12 miles away. The siege of Veii lasted 10 years, as long as the legendary siege of Troy. When the city finally fell in 396 BCE, Rome doubled its territory overnight. But then disaster struck. In 390 BCE, a horde of Celtic warriors led by their chief Brennus swept down from the north. The Roman army was annihilated at the Battle of Alea, and the barbarians captured Rome itself.
For 7 months, Brennus held the city hostage. The Romans, reduced to hiding on the Capitoline Hill, were forced to pay a humiliating ransom of gold. When they complained that the Gallic scales were rigged, Brennus threw his sword onto the scales and declared, "Vae victis, woe to the conquered."
This humiliation burned in Roman memory for generations. Never again would they allow enemies to threaten their city. The sack of Rome by Brennus marked the beginning of Rome's military transformation from a local militia into the most feared fighting force in the ancient world. Rome's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. Within a generation they had not only rebuilt their city, but begun the systematic conquest of the entire Italian peninsula. The Samnite Wars, 343–290 BCE, were Rome's training ground for empire. The Samnites were fierce mountain warriors who controlled much of southern Italy. These weren't quick campaigns but brutal, decades-long struggles that tested every aspect of Roman society. The disaster at the Caudine Forks in 321 BCE, where an entire Roman army was forced to pass under the yoke of surrender, only strengthened Roman resolve. They learned from every defeat, adapted their tactics, and never gave up. Rome's final test in Italy came from an unexpected source: Pyrrhus of Epirus, a Greek king who fancied himself the new Alexander the Great. When he invaded Italy in 280 BCE, he brought war elephants, professional soldiers, and Hellenistic military science. Pyrrhus won every battle, but at such terrible cost that he gave history a new phrase: Pyrrhic victory. After defeating the Romans at Heraclea and Asculum, he reportedly said, "One more such victory and I am lost." The Romans, by contrast, could afford to lose battles because they never lost wars. Their genius lay not in tactical brilliance but in strategic persistence. They would outlast any enemy, no matter the cost. By 264 BCE, Rome controlled all of Italy south of the Po River. But their greatest challenge lay across the narrow waters separating Italy from Sicily, and the maritime empire of Carthage. The collision between Rome and Carthage was inevitable. Both powers were expanding, both needed resources, and both believed themselves destined to rule the Mediterranean. The First Punic War began over Sicily, but it quickly became something much larger, a struggle for the soul of the Mediterranean world. Would the future belong to Roman legions or Carthaginian fleets? The Romans faced a crucial problem. They were landlubbers trying to defeat the greatest naval power in the world. Their solution was typically Roman. They decided to build a navy from scratch. Using a captured Carthaginian ship as a model, the Romans constructed a fleet of over 100 warships in just 60 days. When their first vessels sank because Roman crews didn't know how to sail, they simply built more. The Romans also invented the corvus, a boarding bridge that turned naval battles into land battles. If they couldn't outsail the Carthaginians, they would outfight them. After 23 years of war, Rome emerged victorious. Sicily became their first overseas province, and the Mediterranean was no longer a Carthaginian lake. But Carthage's greatest champion was yet to appear. Hannibal Barca was not just a general, he was a strategic genius whose name still strikes fear into military academies today. Raised from childhood to hate Rome, Hannibal swore a sacred oath at the age of 9 to be Rome's eternal enemy. When he became commander of Carthaginian forces in Spain, that oath would shake the Roman world to its foundations. In 218 BCE, Hannibal launched the most audacious military campaign in ancient history. Rather than fight Rome at sea, where they were now strong, he would attack by land, marching from Spain across the Pyrenees, through Gaul, and over the Alps themselves. The journey was nightmarish. Hostile tribes, treacherous mountain passes, snow, cold, and starvation reduced Hannibal's army from 90,000 men to fewer than 26,000. but those who survived were hardened into the finest fighting force the world had ever seen. For the next 16 years Hannibal ran wild through Italy, winning victory after victory. At Trebia he destroyed one Roman army, at Lake Trasimene he annihilated another. But his masterpiece was Cannae in 216 BCE, the perfect battle. Facing a Roman army of 86,000 men, Hannibal executed a double envelopment that military theorists still study today. In a single afternoon, he killed more Romans than had died in all previous wars combined. Rome's allies began to defect. Some senators proposed negotiating for peace, but the Roman spirit proved unbreakable. They simply refused to surrender, no matter the cost. The man who finally defeated Hannibal was Publius Cornelius Scipio, later called Africanus. Rather than chase Hannibal around Italy, Scipio struck at Carthage itself, forcing Hannibal to return home to defend his own city. At Zama in 202 BCE, student finally defeated master. Rome had survived its greatest test and emerged stronger than ever. The final confrontation was less a war than an execution. For 50 years, the elderly Senator Cato the Elder ended every speech with the same words: Carthage must be destroyed. When the Third Punic War began in 149 BCE, the outcome was never in doubt. Carthage was besieged, captured, and literally wiped from the face of the earth. The Romans sold the survivors into slavery, tore down every building, and allegedly sowed the ruins with salt so nothing would ever grow there again. It was overkill on an epic scale, and a warning to the world. This was what happened to enemies of Rome. With Carthage destroyed, Rome turned east toward the Hellenistic kingdoms that had emerged from Alexander's empire. The Macedonian Wars, 214–148 BCE, brought Roman legions face to face with the famous Macedonian phalanx. At Cynoscephalae and Pydna, Roman flexibility defeated Greek discipline. Greece, the birthplace of democracy and philosophy, became a Roman province. Syria, Egypt, and Asia Minor followed. By 133 BCE, Rome had no equals, only subjects. The Roman Republic now controlled an empire stretching from Spain to Syria, from Britain to North Africa. They had achieved something no previous power had managed: the unification of the Mediterranean world under a single government. But success brought new problems. How do you govern an empire with institutions designed for a city-state? How do you maintain republican virtue when wealth and power pour in from conquered provinces? These questions would test the Roman Republic to its breaking point, and beyond. Rome's conquest brought unprecedented wealth and power, but also unprecedented problems. Enormous amounts of gold, silver, and slaves flowed into the city, transforming Roman society beyond recognition. The old citizen farmers who had built the Republic were being replaced by slave-worked plantations. Soldiers who had spent decades in foreign wars returned to find their farms ruined and their families impoverished. Meanwhile, the aristocratic families who governed the provinces grew fabulously wealthy. The gap between rich and poor was becoming a chasm that threatened the very foundations of the Republic. Cultural changes were equally dramatic. Greek art, philosophy, and luxury corrupted traditional Roman simplicity. Some Romans worried their ancestors' virtues were being lost in the pursuit of pleasure and profit. Most ominously, successful generals were becoming more powerful than the state itself. When a single man could command the loyalty of 10 legions and the wealth of entire provinces, what was to stop him from marching on Rome itself? These seeds of destruction were already planted. In our next episode, we'll see how they would grow into civil wars that would tear the Republic apart and pave the way for the rise of Julius Caesar. The Roman Republic had conquered the world. Now it would have to conquer itself.